warm welcome from Islamabad, Pakistan. My name is Khalid Latif, and I am the Program Director Middle East at the Center of Pakistan and International Relations, COPER. COPER is a non-profit, non-partisan strategic think tank that advances solutions to Pakistan's national policy objectives through high-quality research and analysis. It is a pleasure to welcome you all today to this online conversation on Pakistan through the lens of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The geopolitical and geoeconomic forces that bind these two regions together is an area of growing focus and interest for us here at COPER, and for very good reason. Pakistan's Middle East policy, with its own strengths and weaknesses, is born out of the region's power dynamics underpinned by sectarian and economic configurations. Although the Middle East often presents itself as a geopolitical battleground where external powers tend to settle their contentions, Pakistan's relations with its long-standing allies in the Middle East have become uneasy since its decision to remain neutral in the Yemen war. The Middle East for decades has been one of the primary sources of financial support for Pakistan. Pakistan maintains close military ties with Saudi Arabia, providing extensive support, arms, and training for the Saudi armed forces. Since the 1970s, Pakistani soldiers have been stationed in Saudi Arabia to protect the kingdom. However, in the last few years, geostrategic compulsions have necessitated Pakistan to adopt a balancing act in order to safeguard its core national interests. Centrifugal forces unleashed in the Middle East has pushed the main regional powers into at least two opposing blocs. On the one hand, we have countries that could be described as supporters of transnational political Islam, including Turkey under President Erdogan and Malaysia under the former Prime Minister Muhammad Mahdiyar, versus on the other side countries advocating for a more nationalistic outlook on international politics such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Such dynamics have in effect reshaped the choreography of relations between the Middle East and Pakistan. Joining me to unpack these developments and much, much more are five excellent and distinguished list of speakers who I shall introduce in order of appearance. Our first speaker from Pakistan is Lieutenant Naeem Lodhi, a former Defense Secretary of Pakistan. The title of his talk shall be U.S. Exit from Afghanistan and Implications for Pakistan. From the U.S., we have Dr. Marvin Weinbaum, Director of Afghanistan and Pakistan Studies at the Middle East Institute. The title of his talk shall be Pakistan Navigating the Shoals of Middle East Politics. Also from the US, we have Arif Rafiq, President of Wiser Consulting. The title of his talk will be Pakistan-Saudi Relations in the Era of Mohammed bin Salman. From the UK, we have Omar Karim, Visiting Fellow, Royal United Services Institute. The title of his speech will be Power Politics of the Middle East and Pakistan. Last but not least, from Pakistan, we also have Brigadier Samson Simon Saraf. The title of his speech is going to be The Greater Middle East. Our moderator for today's session is Raja Faisal, who is a senior journalist and executive editor of the Asian Telegraph. Over to you, Raja Faisal.
Omar Karim, and now we head towards the last guest we have. He's a geopolitical strategist, and I have extensively read his work on the geopolitics of the region, and he is Brigadier Samson Sharaf. He's a pro when it comes to geopolitics. The title for his debate today would be The Greater Middle East. Sir, you own the floor.
Thank you very much, Raja Faisal, for putting me in the back benches. It's always good to be the last speaker because you don't have to come prepared. All you have to do is sum up all the other speakers and the job is done. Nonetheless, I have written on the Middle East for a very long time. And my context of the greater Middle East, a quest for United States of America and its allies, has been my hypothesis for very long, because I think that with the rising Asian powers, the era of American and the Western geopolitics in the region is coming to an end. And as it comes to an end, obviously, there's going to be a lot of commotion, there's going to be strife, there's going to be violence, because it is a policy which is over 150 years old, which is coming to an end. When we talk of a greater Middle East, we must remember that it is a continuation of a mindset that has existed for over 100 years. If you go back to the famous geopolitical theories, Mackinder talked of the Asian heartland, which was the powerhouse. And then we had the rimland, brought around by Spikeman, who said it could be contained. So if you don't control the heartland, you contain the rimland, and the containment strategy came, which resulted into NATO, CENTO, and CETO, and the APEC, and still continues to date. And in one form or the other, it has been resurfacing. Even during the British control of the subcontinent, the British Afghan policy, or the forward policy, so to say, was geared towards an expanding imperial Russia. So it's been there for a very long time. Sometimes we hear a term like MENA, which means Middle East, North Africa. We hear of a term West Asia and Central Asia, and this is the nexus. And we've also been hearing about the greater Middle East. As you can see, this was Nicholas Spikeman, 1893, talking of the rimland. And this is what the deployment, barring Pakistan, Iran, and Bangladesh now is. Previously, when the Baghdad Pact, the CENTO, and the CETO was there, the containment at that time was complete. And you have on the right, eastern side, you have the refurbished and renamed Indo-Pacific Command, which also includes India as an declared and undeclared ally. You have the Quad on that side. You have a very strong Middle East now, with collaboration of United States of America, Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, Egypt, one group. And of course, the Europe belongs to United States of America. And this is how the containment has been, but is most likely to be perforated very soon. If we look at the other map, if we look at the other map, United States of America now, primarily because of its allies, is still the Atlantic power and the Pacific power. But its role as an Asian power is diminishing. After the two wars of Iraq, two invasions of Iraq, and now the US retrograde and withdrawal from Afghanistan, and knowing that many spaces in Iraq are now occupied by Iranian influence forces, United States of America, in the adventurism of past 20, 30 years, has ceded more spaces to the adversary than it has been able to gain. And this has actually been contrary to the project of the new American century, the PNAC, because what PNAC the vision that PNAC had given was an all-dominating United States of America controlling the entire world. And basically, whatever President Bush Jr.'s policy was after 9/11 and till now, the many actors who were instrumental in the policy making, like Dick Cheney, like Rumsfeld, they were very much part of the PNAC project also. So as I look at it, despite this fixation with a land power, its containment, not allowing it to reach, the geostrategic grand strategy has actually been perforated. One, America gained nothing ultimately it gained nothing by invasion of Iraq on the pretext of sexed up dossiers. Afghanistan, you all know, Iran came closer to the United States of America during the times of President Obama, but then again, everything changed in the times of President Trump and Jared Kushner. Pakistan, which was considered to be neither a friend or a foe, was a transactional relationship country, probably has drifted away a long way from the United States of America in all this time. So, in this quest for a greater Middle East, United States of America has not been a winner, but it does not consider that it is a loser either. And it will play its cards the way it has been playing world over. For instance, in Libya, which is part of the MENA region, France, United States of America, Egypt managed to topple a regime and brought instability there. Iraq is still unstable. Syria is completely unstable. Lebanon, so to say, is not very stable either. The Palestine question is still unanswered. Afghanistan is going to undergo new dynamics of stability and instability after the United States of America retrogrades from Afghanistan. Some of the questions that arise is that for a very long time, at least 30 years, an unstable Afghanistan was an important plank of US policy, because an unstable Afghanistan was a check on Pakistan, it was a check on China, it was a check on Iran. And after 9/11, when the United States of America and its allies had a physical presence for 2 decades in Afghanistan, it was so much the better. But in this long time, they have not been able to make substantial gains. Rather, they've not been able to make any gains. If it was a check against China, China has risen economically and is now a global power. If it was against Iran, Iran has grown economically despite sanctions, and it has grown as a military power also. If it was against Pakistan as a check, then they've not been able to destabilize Pakistan with the many destabilizing trajectories that the think tanks had been projecting, that there'll be an unstable Pakistan, the nuclear weapons will be in the hands of mullahs, and then United Nations forces will intervene and Pakistan, will be disarmed, and this will happen and that. Nothing of that. So actually, in the past 20 years, corresponding to the presence of United States of America in Afghanistan, Pakistan has grown much stronger in the strategic and military sense. The next point is that Iran is going to be a crucial actor after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. And obviously, Pakistan's economic interests now rest more with China than with any other country of the world. And China has a big economic partnership with Iran. The question will be those countries who try to cooperate with Iran, how are they going to circumvent US imposed sanctions? This sanctions will be a tool which will be employed once again. There's always been a question whether Turkey will break away from NATO and all. As was brought about by another speaker, that, Turkey was always talking of Europe, and now, ever since Erdogan has come, things have changed. But I think Turkey continues to look in both directions even today. The mere fact that Turkey has shown willingness to provide a rear guard to the US withdrawal at Bagram indicates that Turkey wishes to continue engaging various countries in the region, and also the various blocs, including United States of America. Now, if the United States of America withdraws by September, there is going to be trouble, as brought about by General Lodi, most probably because of the peculiar primordial tribal politics. Warlords will join hands, mostly with the Afghan Mujahideen. President Ashraf Ghani will be isolated. Major cities and capitals will be invested, and ultimately they will fall. And after that, there could be stability in Afghanistan. But I want to point out certain turning points in history where stability could have been brought in Afghanistan and it was not brought. For instance, the same type of an accord which the Afghan Mujahideen are trying to reach now in Afghanistan, a consensus with all blocs and everything, was actually reached in 1996. Of course, it had backing of Pakistan, but the final stumbling block to that was that United States of America did not agree to it. And the day the drafts of that agreement of a broader governance between all factions in Afghanistan, the DFA, or the draft agreement, was initialed, 2 days after that, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, in 1996 was removed. This was one chance when stability could have been brought. The second chance was after 9/11, when the Afghan Taliban offered to hand over Osama bin Laden to a Muslim country, which was Turkey. And they said that he should be tried by a Muslim Sharia court for war crimes. Had that happened, the invasion of Afghanistan would never have taken place. Americans rejected that plan. And again, this was negotiated by General Nasirullah Babar and Benazir Bhutto. Now is the third opportunity. In the previous two, the instability in Afghanistan was an important plank of policy. Now we have to guess and see whether Afghanistan will remain stable or it will become unstable. What I suspect, one of my most dangerous scenarios or probabilities that I look at, may not be the most probable, but it is certainly the most dangerous, is that if we look from Pakistan towards Afghanistan, in the Nangarhar region, in the Tora Bora range, there is a very strong presence of Daesh, ISIS, and Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan over there. For the past 10 years, despite their presence, the United States of America and its allies have not been able to eliminate that area, despite the fact that on one occasion they had used the mother of all bombs. That is a very strong citadel from where it is very easy to debouch into Pakistan and create instability inside Pakistan, because the layout of the ground facilitates entry into Pakistan in that region. So Pakistan has to be very careful about those elements which are there, and also the elements which are supporting the Baloch nationalists and the others in the Kandahar area and other places. So as far as Pakistan's security concerns are concerned, this part of Afghanistan has not been cleared. And that is why Pakistan had been asking United States of America and the government of Afghanistan to do something about these elements. And the type of military assistance that we've been reading about in New York Times and in other newspapers, this Director General of CIA on his visit to Pakistan, they were asking Pakistan for bases for drones and all that. Were they meant to be dealing with Taliban when they are fighting against the forces of Ashraf Ghani, or are they meant for all these elements who will do disruption inside Pakistan? It's not very clear. And I think the policy of the government of Pakistan on this is very astute. It is very firm. As far as logistics are concerned, they will facilitate them till the end of September. But military purposes, overflights, there should be no basis. And in case there is a violation of airspace, then I fear there will also be a high-tech conflict in the area. This is a dangerous possibility. As was brought out by Dr. Momen, Pakistan is economically weak. Yes, the Ford Foundation once upon a time contemplated Pakistan to be the breadbasket of Middle East. And let's not forget 5,000 years of history. Pakistan was the breadbasket of Middle East. The flatbed boats were invented in River Indus, and they used to fly right into the estuaries of the Persian Gulf. They used to sail right through the. What has actually happened is, in agriculture, Pakistan has been deliberately kept backward because of giving benefits to an agriculture industry which popped out of nowhere after Second World War. It was the military industrial complex using fertilizers and other things, explosives as fertilizer and all that. Certainly, when good days for Pakistan will come, Pakistan will become a breadbasket. Lastly, what I want to say is the future in the context of greater Middle East now is the BRI and CPAC. And in this context, Pakistan is firmly allied with People's Republic of China and other allies in the region. To say the last word, beggars are not choosers, and friends are not masters. If Pakistan really wants to become a strong country, according to the rhetoric that we keep talking about, then we have to do something about our national past. Right now, we have a very, very lopsided equation. We have strong forward legs, weak hind legs. We have to build up our entire structure. It has to be a sustainable growth for the next 20, 30 years, as was being said by the Finance Minister of Pakistan today, Mr. Shaukat Aziz. Only then will we stop becoming dependent on other countries and sacrificing so much of our pride and interest for sake of small regions. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you very much. And in the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that why you were kept at the last. Well, we had two excellent course mates today. We started with one of the course mates and we ended with the other one. So that's why we kept you at last. And we have a very interesting question for you. Actually, we have a research intern nowadays with us in our office, Aisha. She hails from Canada, and for 2 months she's in Islamabad with us. And she is a student of politics at York University, and she has sent a question to me. I would read it out as she has said. She says, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems that Pakistan takes the role of a bystander in geopolitics regarding the Arab world. Would Would that be a correct statement to make? Sir, this is a question especially from you, she's asking.
This this is a question which has been repeated in this August forum today thrice. Pakistan is not a bystander. Pakistan is the pivot of Asia. When we talked of the pivot states, if you recollect 40 years ago reading Foreign Affairs magazine, Pakistan was mentioned as the pivot state. It was mentioned as the fulcrum. It was mentioned as the doorway to Central Asia, China and Russia. Pakistan's geostrategic and geopolitical importance cannot be underestimated. And that is why, despite 20 years of crisis, despite something which was actually a civil war for 10 years in Pakistan, something which NATO with all and ISAF with all their allies, technology and firepower could not do, Pakistan achieved. Today, the FATA regions, known as lawless regions, are integrated into mainstream Pakistan. We fought our own battle. While others may think we were standing as bystanders, we were consolidating our country internally. One. Secondly, our defense and strategic capability has grown manifold. If you recall the Pulwama incident and the crisis after that, and the warning given by Pakistan's Prime Minister to the Indians who were planning strikes on Pakistan from the missile sites and everything, Pakistan came out to be very strong. And if you look at Pulwama, how with complete immunity, aircrafts Mirage 5, which have been discarded world over, Pakistan Air Force used under a superior command control system and electronic broad spectrum electronic domination of Indian held Kashmir, India was not able to react. So Pakistan has not been a bystander. Pakistan is passing through its, if you have read the Rand and the Carnegie, they agree how Pakistan can be destabilized. And the ultimate aim is to defang Pakistan. Pakistan went through that phase very cautiously. We made ourselves stronger. We made sure we cannot be defanged. Even internally, we are a more cohesive nation today. Forget the propaganda which comes from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. in Pakistani TV channels. Pakistan is a much more cohesive nation today. So actually, we have gone strong. How many countries in the world which were in the midst of COVID have shown such growth as Pakistan has shown? Look at India, what is happening in India. Indians themselves, I am in one of the WhatsApp group of the Indians. They say our estimated deaths are more than 50 lakhs. But India is not admitting it. There's a complete blanket over it. We've done extremely well. Let us have trust in our country. Let's have trust in our system. You know, in cricket, or there's always a time when you let it pass. It's known as well left. Pakistan's been doing that, but we've done it well. We've played the game very well, notwithstanding which political party was in power in Pakistan. They have played the game very well. At least in defense and foreign policy, there's always been cohesion. So now our next phase begins of economic development. So we would like to have a stable Afghanistan and become economically developed country. It's always been my hypothesis, and I've been a very ardent student of Dr. Zafar Altaf, late Dr. Zafar Altaf. He was my mentor for a very long time. And Dr. Ishfaq Ahmed Khan, an eminent economist from Pakistan. We need 3 years to break out. We can reach coming today in 3 years, we can have a GDP of over 10. This is the power potential of Pakistan. As was mentioned by Dr. Momin, resources. Pakistan is not a resource-starved country. We have all the resources. There are unexplored minerals. We have some of the largest deposits of lignite coal. We have some of the biggest deposits of copper and gold in the world. We have about 14 rivers, not 4 or 5 rivers. We've got all types of weather. We've got lushing plains. We've got a huge agriculture potential. The only thing is, Pakistan has to be liberated from the Pakistanis who are clinging to it like blood-sucking leeches. Once that happens, Pakistan is on a springboard. So we are not a bystander. Thank you very much for asking this question, this young Aisha from York University.
Sir, thank you very much. And you ended with a hope. And we always hope that Pakistan, overcomes all of these menaces and we can be back on track, as we are already seeing that Pakistan's shift from the security state to, the other things. It is happening that Pakistan would emerge itself as a shining star in the region as well as in the world.